We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down. Let my people go. We will not bow down.
Well, hello and welcome to episode 68 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swadling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how are things with you?
Okay, Dan. Yes, I didn't think I'd ever long for the days that from my childhood of 4-minute warnings, and it turns out I didn't. But other than that, very well, Dan. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. It's I think COVID's over, but there's another little matter that's on the news at the moment, which we will no doubt be talking about shortly. Well, we're delighted to be joined on the podcast today by Andrew Allison, the Chief Executive of the Freedom Association. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So, Mike, what have we got to talk about today then?
Well, as alluded to, we're going to talk about Ukraine and the Russian invasion. Closest to home, we'll be talking about Croydon Council and its potential bankruptcy again, the broken record. And of course, we'll have a chat with Andrew about the Freedom Association.
Well, yes, the unthinkable has happened. The CIA and MI5 have been warning us for a while that Putin was going to invade Ukraine. I think some of us thought this was just saber rattling from the sidelines. Following the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and certain parts of eastern Ukraine deciding that they should rather be Russian than Ukrainian. That's been the situation recently. Obviously, historically, Ukraine has been invaded from all sides over the last 100 years and indeed a bit beyond that. So it's a landmass that's had a lot of trouble over the years, but didn't expect to see what we've been seeing over the past week or so. We've seen the shelling of civilians in the cities in Ukraine, and even the shelling of a nuclear power plant by the Russians. Mike, ridiculous and very disturbing scenes.
Indeed. We obviously don't want to see the invasion of a third country as has happened here. And there's something, we're used to countries treating their citizens badly, and that's a terrible thing to say, and we shouldn't be used to it. But it is something that happens, and often it's very powerful nations we're not prepared to stand up or go against. But we have, since the Second World War, generally kept the peace and stopped countries invading, other sovereign nations, certainly in Europe and Central South America, what have you. Shocking to see that happen, shocking to see the impact it has on people. But I fear there's not much now we can do, and sanctions aside, and those actions are being taken. The only way to stop the invasion is before it starts, and once it started, it's unlikely we can really respond with force against Russia, I'm afraid.
So, Andrew, obviously Ukraine is not in NATO, and there's been talk of it joining, and indeed talk of it joining the EU, and it's these matters which allegedly, according to some people, have persuaded Putin that he needs to have them as a buffer state, and it's got his back up somewhat. What have you made of the West's reaction to what's been going on?
In the West, we've done everything that we possibly could. We went through all the diplomatic routes to avoid a war. I think, like many people, I felt that Putin wouldn't do a full-scale invasion. I thought it would be more sort of salami tactics, slice by slice, trying to take pieces of territories, trying to gain control politically without invading of certain cities and certain regions. Though I have to say that someone I know who I will not name for reasons which will become apparent as a former British intelligence officer warned me that Putin would invade, and she had absolutely no doubt that he would invade. And of course, she proved right. She was proved right, as indeed were our British intelligence services and the CIA. So I think we've done everything that we can. The package of sanctions initially against Putin's Russia were not great, but at the same time, and in all fairness to the Prime Minister, NATO and the West in general were trying to move in lockstep with each other. And because we found out that Germany didn't really want to put a harsh package of sanctions in place, we learned that Italy still wanted to sell luxury goods to Muscovites. But eventually, I think people have caught up, and all we can do now is put the toughest package of sanctions against Russia that there is, to completely isolate it from the rest of the world, and that does appear to be going well. So I think we're really doing everything that we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just before we got on the podcast, I noticed there's a Russian racing driver who's been sacked from his racing car team. But I believe he actually does have some links to some of the oligarchs from the piece that I was reading. And I know, whether somebody's mad, bad, or dangerous. I think most people were not overly enamored by Putin, but he does seem to have gone a bit mad, frankly. He seems to be wanting to go back to the kind of like czarist regime of of over a century ago, well, very much over a century ago. As we speak, given the sanctions that are being imposed across the world, and the impact that might have in the longer term to some of those people who have made him rich and who indeed he's helped to make rich, these oligarchs, does anybody think there's any potential for one or two of them to get together and tap him on the shoulder and say enough is enough?
Well, that's all we can hope for, in all fairness, that the oligarchs, or indeed the military top brass, the generals in Moscow, do that. And it could be Putin dead or alive at the end of all of this. But the only way that we're going to prevent further incursions into other countries and just Putin's expansionist policies is by removing Putin. And we can't do that. We can't send a missile straight into the Kremlin. That will be World War III. It's just like we can't enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, because that will be World War III. It's got the potential of NATO forces shooting down Russian jets. The only thing that we can hope for is that these sanctions bite to such an extent that internally very rich and powerful people in Russia will indeed remove Putin.
I completely agree with what Andrew's saying there. Just something there, Dan, in terms of Putin going mad. There's a risk, I always think, here of looking at this from a Western eye and say, well, we are an independent democracy. We believe in independent democracies. Therefore, surely the Russians must believe in independent democracies. Why are they attacking one in the Ukraine? And we can maybe argue how democratic the Ukraine always was, but why are they attacking one? If you look at it through a Russian eye, and I think also add the analogy, if you look at Taiwan from a Chinese eye, they're not saying, oh, there's an independent democracy, we need to leave it as so because that's what we like. They're saying we need a buffer zone to ourselves. The Chinese are saying we want to unite the Han Chinese. And indeed, Putin's case, he wants to unite the Russians. They are saying that a czarist foreign policy is not necessarily mad from a Russian's eye. Now, not from our eye, but from a Russian's eye, it's not necessarily mad. And if you're putting that head on, then I think that changes slightly what we do, which as I've already said, and as Andrew said, we can't do a lot about Ukraine necessarily beyond sanctions that are in place. But Moldova, Finland, reinforcing troops in the Baltic states, Georgia are now making noises about joining NATO. There may well be a number of things we can do, and indeed increased defence around Taiwan. And I believe Japan and Australia are sort of coming together and to some extent in that end, and having other nation states in that region doing it. It's very important. the way you stop them is go, well, where are their policies going, and how, and you win the war before the war's fought. And again, as Andrew alluded to there about Germany and their sanctions, you're not likely to impose sanctions that means your families in your country are going cold at winter. Let's be honest. So you win that war, you win the sanctions war by having a domestic fuel policy that doesn't rely on rogue states. You win these things by steadying yourself with other democracies in terms of your basic fundamental needs. And that's where the West has gone. I think in many ways we kind of lost the Ukraine before anyone had set foot on the ground. I hope the West now uses a period to make sure we don't lose the next country, because we've already got ourselves in a solid foundation.
So, Andrew, do you think the world is moving in the direction of sort of authoritarian states working together, let's say China and Russia and a few others, and that the kind of liberal democracies are going to have to get their act together?
Yes, I think there is a new axis. Ever since Russia annexed Crimea, in 2014, China and Russia have grown closer. And they traditionally had a cool relationship, but it's now much warmer than it used to be. You put other countries like Iran and Pakistan into the mix, and this is a great worry for those of us in the West. But there is good news there, and it's just been said by Mike. The countries are waking up to the threat now. Germany, who I believe only spent about 1.36% of GDP on defense, well below the 2% NATO minimum, which I also think is ridiculously low at the moment. But Germany's going to spend much more money. Poland is beefing up its military forces. Other countries are moving in this direction. And yes, the Taiwan Chinese, the threat to Taiwan rather from the Chinese government is also going to be taken seriously. So I think the West is gradually waking up, and we are going to spend more money on defense. There was great hope and optimism, wasn't there? Back in about 30 years ago now, the fall of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall had been brought down just a few years before, and we thought Russia could move in a democratic way, and of course it could have moved in a much more democratic way, but unfortunately it didn't. So really that threat has never gone away, and it makes you wonder whether people like Putin have really been planning all of this for the last 30 years.
Indeed, worrying times in that respect. If we can possibly find something, I'm going to say positive, out of this whole situation, we have seen some moves from, as you say, with Germany, and they're actually going to spend what they should be spending to be a NATO nation on their military. But also even the Green Party, who are one of the coalition partners in the recently formed German government, even they are now talking about having possibly nuclear power plants back up and running, and moving away from being so reliant upon Russia for their gas. Although I think that will take some time, because they had become very reliant upon them, albeit they seem to have cancelled this Nord Stream 2 pipeline that they were dealing with. Really does play into this whole net zero agenda, which we've been hearing about over recent times, and indeed our government seems to have completely bought into. I think we're going to need some energy, and we can't be reliant upon other nations. So I'm not sure the windmills are going to do it all for us. So Mike, do you think there's a possible wider impact here, which might actually be something sensible for us?
We can but hope. I have wondered for a while when the Conservatives would change on net zero. They're still not showing it, even though this does seem like a good opportunity. And I've wondered that because net zero to me always felt like a policy that you leave as a booby trap for the next government. And then somewhere along the lines, it looked like the Conservatives would still be the government in 2030, and such as the ineptitude of Labour, that booby trap might well well blow up under them. So, you know, we're not going to be at net zero, not if we want to stay warm in this country. We're not all going to have electric cars and charge points. I live in a street of terraced housing. As I look down that street, they were not all going to have charge points in our driveways that don't exist. You know, there's so many things about it. We're not also going to have land heaters, these sinks in our gardens that are, you know, the size of patches. You know, there's so much that's not going to work about it. But beyond all the stuff you can mock, here right now is a thing we could do. Just imagine 5-10 years ago when the fracking wells were looking possible in the north of England. They had been opened. We had decided to go into it in the same way we went into North Sea oil. An abundance of well-paid, non-movable jobs would have been created in some of the more deprived parts of the country. And just imagine we were facing Putin now, but rather than the Germans stopping a new pipeline from Russia, they've just commissioned the pipeline from the north of England. You know, imagine the difference that would make. And then just frankly pray that government wakes up and uses some sense around that.
So, Andrew, is it time to get fracking?
I think so, yes. I think it's time to do all sorts of things, from the small modular nuclear power stations that Rolls-Royce are pioneering. There's all sorts of things that we can do. To say that we don't have an energy policy in this country would be wrong, but to say that we don't have a viable energy policy in this country, I think would be correct. If you recall at the United Nations General Assembly last year, when Boris Johnson was addressing it, he was quoting Kermit the Frog. I can't remember if Kermit said it's hard being green or it's not easy being green, but Boris was trying to say that it was easy being green, and he was speaking about all the wind turbines around this country and how we're going to be the Saudi Arabia of wind. Unfortunately for him, at the time he was making that speech, the wind wasn't blowing in the UK and we weren't generating any electricity. So this idea that we're all going to move to electric cars, millions, tens of millions of electric cars on the road, all needing to be charged up overnight, it's simply for the birds. It's not going to happen. Yes, we do need to go fracking. We've got this rich resource of natural gas under us that will certainly see us through in the medium term. But I think we really do need to go more nuclear just to have enough energy to supply our needs. It's not often you'll hear me say anything good about the French, but the French certainly got it right in building nuclear power stations, and it served them very well.
Indeed. Well, we'll see what develops, and I'm sure all our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Ukraine at the moment. So, Croydon Council, our good friends at Croydon Council, they seem to be in bother yet again. We have the local elections coming up in May, where, of course, we're going to be having a directly elected mayor for the first time. Will anybody deal with this situation properly? There's a new threat and a further Section 114 notice being issued to the council. There's currently a dispute between the council's auditors, Grant Thornton, and the council over £73 million. And they've refused to sign off the 2020-2021 accounts. Mike, what's going on now?
Just quite unbelievable, this to me. As you mentioned, there's a dispute over £73 million and whether it was treated as revenue or capital expenditure. So for those, I'll try to avoid glazing over your eyes at the moment, but for those unfamiliar with major corporation or public money spending, much money is spent either as revenue, i.e. in-year spending, consumable items, or capital, which is investment spend, buildings, new equipment, and what have you. And they are treated differently because they are the costs are written off over in different ways, and certain costs, capital tends to be a one-off. You might have one-off every year for different things, but it's a one-off for a particular item. And revenue is an enduring cost, staff, for instance. It's very boring stuff. I spend an inordinate amount of time in my job and as a school governor and in various other things I've been involved in, talking about the difference between revenue and capital. But it is because it is important. The fact that Croydon Council couldn't get this right, the fact they couldn't get it right at a time they already knew their finances were in trouble, I think is breathtaking. And it is a level of incompetence. I don't know what else we can call it. I happened to speak to a couple of people in and around the council at the time the first Section 114 notices were going out. And I mentioned to them that, you know, if it was me in their position, an unenviable position though it was, I would be going round with a trolley and a big bell going, bring out your dead, bring out your dead, you know, and having in work life occasionally gone into places that are in trouble. You go in and the first thing you do is you explode the problem as big as possible. You try and get all of the problems out and on the table and make it look as big as it can be, so that you know the worst case scenario to build forward from. The fact that all this has happened at Croydon and they've missed which in Croydon terms of bankruptcy, actually 73 million quid is always a rounding error, but the fact they've missed 73 million quid, you wonder what any of, and I have to say, those clowns are doing. And of course, it's blowing it looks like it's blowing the budget again, and we know that's only more pain for Croydon.
Indeed, I can't wait for my new council tax bill to arrive shortly. Well, Andrew, obviously you're not a Croydon resident yourself. Have you been following this shambolic story at all?
I've been looking at it because there was a Section 114 notice given. I think was it 2020? Am I right on that? I mean, this is not.
Yes.
Seems to be a common thread now in Croydon Council. And for those listeners, of course, who don't know what Section 114 is, it's basically to anybody else, it's almost like a bankruptcy order. You know, you're going to go bankrupt here. Any other business probably would. It just strikes me that it is a badly mismanaged council. Now, we've got, if you look at Tower Hamlets, of course, I mean, there was lots of corruption there. But Eric Pickles, when he was Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, brought in sort of special advisors, one of the commissioners, I think they were called, to do that. The same sort of thing is going on in Liverpool at the moment, and it does make you wonder whether the Secretary of State is going to have to intervene here and simply put in new management in Croydon to actually make it fit for purpose.
Very much agree. Once is a mistake, twice is really appalling. A third time is, how is anyone still involved in that was originally involved in this still around? It really does beg a belief. Of course, the upshot of this though is you can ask the question: are they learning? Are things getting better? And just recently, Croydon Council has decided not to pass any more business to the auditors Grant Thornton for different reasons than the fact that they keep embarrassing the council. But I mean, it's just more than a suspicion that it's because they keep embarrassing the council. And at some point, it's bad enough that they keep getting it wrong. It's the fact they don't even want to try to get it right that's I think most worrying.
Well, I agree with you on that. I mean, do you think an elected mayor will make any difference? I mean, I'm not all that convinced, to be perfectly honest, on elected mayors. And I mean, I used the Tower Hamlets example. I mean, that was a disaster there, wasn't it? Really,
it was. We certainly hope so. The thing about Croydon is that the north of the borough is all red, the south of the borough is all blue, and there's a bit in the middle that changes hands. What we are hoping with an elected mayor is that it will make them act more borough-wide, because they will have to win votes across the borough, not just in one part, and they will need to govern with a bit more even-handedness. And this could be said about the Conservatives in Croydon as well. They are, they didn't represent the north because they literally didn't represent the north, and Labour don't represent the south because they literally don't represent the south. And the fact that we are moving to a model where whoever wins is actually polling their vote, yes, maybe in one area predominantly, but across the whole borough, we think will be a good thing. And it kicks out the existing cabal. Now some of them went, but most of the current cabinet were in the cabinet when we initially went bankrupt. they've clearly not learned. They've clearly not got a grip of the situation. And if nothing else, whoever is the eventual winner of the mayoral contest, I'm almost 100% certain to say it won't be anyone that was in the cabinet that drove us over the cliff.
Yeah, but no, you make some very good points there, and I think anything that can, or anyone rather, who can unify and work for the greater benefits of everyone in Croydon. Well, yes, hopefully that will work and avoid some of this appalling mismanagement. It's the only way you can describe it. It's amateur hour, isn't it?
It is. Oh, yeah, totally.
Yes, it will be interesting to see what the result of the elections in May is, and whether we'll get a new shiny new council, and hopefully try and sort this mess out. So, Mike, I think you've got some questions for Andrew.
I do indeed. So, Andrew, thanks for your time already, and just introduce you a bit to our listeners and introduce the Freedom Association. So firstly, with that in mind, could you maybe introduce the Freedom Association to our listeners?
Yes, of course. I mean, the Freedom Association was founded in 1975. We have 10 principles of a free society. Things like freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. We also believe very firmly in free markets. And as we've just discussed, strong national defences, which is something that we have argued for, indeed greater spending of GDP on defence. Our founders were Viscount Delisle, a very brave man who won a Victoria Cross in the Second World War. There was also Major John Gourier, and two people that many listeners of a certain vintage will remember, which were Ross and Norris McWhirter. Anyone who watched Record Breakers on the BBC as a child with Roy Castle certainly will remember Norris. Ross was sadly assassinated just before the formal launch of the Freedom Association in 1975. He was assassinated by the IRA.
Yes, indeed. Yes. No, thank you for that. And a big heritage of people setting up the association. So obviously in recent times, we've had various forms of lockdown for the past 2 years. What's the Freedom Association's views been about this period?
Well, initially, I don't think any of us knew what was happening. We saw people dying on hospital wards in northern Italy, and we knew this was coming to us. So I was perfectly willing to accept a sort of 3-4 week type of lockdown scenario, just to try and steady the ship. The government was talking about building what became Nightingale hospitals. Yeah, if it just eases the pressure on the health service, and then we can get back to normal again. Well, I say normal, but I mean people will just be able to make their own choices about their lives. But of course, that 3 weeks turned into 6 weeks, and then sort of went on for the best part of 2 years. And that's where it all went badly wrong. We trust people to elect governments. We trust people to elect a new mayor to try and clean things up in Croydon. We trust people to do all sorts of things and make all sorts of decisions about their lives. And yet here we were in a situation where the police fined, I mean, later this fine was overturned, but fined two friends who decided to go for a socially distanced walk in Derbyshire. And they were told they were about to have a picnic because they had a cup of coffee in their hands. We had the ridiculous situation where people were criticising others for turning up in parks to try and do a little bit of exercise, where the police were moving people on because they were sitting on the grass for too long. It all went completely potty. And that's certainly when all of those stories started coming in. This is when the Freedom Association said, look, we've had our break for a few weeks now. We've seen what COVID is like. We now have to trust people to make their own decisions. And although I may have been criticised by many people for trying to put the economy maybe above lives, as I keep reminding people, people need a livelihood. They need jobs. They need an income to be able to put a roof over their heads, to be able to feed and clothe their children, to be able to put food on the table. And we can't just keep on destroying businesses and destroying lives. We can't continue like that. So thank goodness all of these restrictions have now ended. I think they were months and months overdue. I mean, I was pleased that Boris Johnson didn't go with the so-called experts over the summer and ended certain restrictions there. And I was certainly delighted that he's ended them now. But the sting in the tail for me is that really it was never his right to be able to take away those freedoms from us in the first place.
I absolutely fully agree with that. And yes, I think we all gave the government a benefit of the doubt for 3 weeks, or many of us did. Most of us did. And yes, I'm not sure we'd ever do that again.
No, I don't think we will. I think this is the problem, actually, Mike. This is the big problem. You know, whenever a prime minister stands up and says, "Oh, we need to shut down the economy for this. We need to restrict your freedoms," they're going, "Yeah, up yours. We're not doing that again." And it could be for something extremely serious, but we're not going to trust the government again, and that's been the big problem.
That's yeah, you're right. That's a very fair point. Now, look at yourself. Prior to working for the Freedom Association, you worked at the Taxpayers Alliance, who we've done quite a bit of work with, and your profile described you as a full-time political campaigner. So for those of us that are keen amateurs, can you tell us a little bit about how you made the switch from running a driving school to where you are today?
Yeah, I did. I used to train driving instructors, and I also used to train military personnel at a place called Leconfield, not far from where I am now. Defence School of Transport. Well, I knew this question was coming, so I've tried to give a condensed version of this so I don't go on for too long. But it's amazing how certain things just happen by chance. Now, although I was living down here in East Yorkshire, I was still an organist for a parish church in County Durham. And normally after a morning service, I would go to the vicarage for a cup of coffee. But this Sunday morning, I didn't. I was meeting some friends in Sheffield. So I was driving down. I was listening to Michael Parkinson's Radio 2 show. And they were talking about a business magazine, The Business. And I thought I might pick myself up a copy of that. So I did, as a result of listening to that interview. And in the magazine, there was an article by Tim Montgomery, who was the founder of Conservative Home. And he was talking about blogging. And I thought, maybe I could get into this blogging lark, you know. This was about 2006. So I did get into this blogging lark, and I started my own blog and met quite a few people. Someone encouraged me to make contact with David Davis's team in Halton, Price and Howden and do some help there, which I did. I went to a Conservative Party conference. I bumped into Mark Wallace, who at the time was the campaign director for the Taxpayers Alliance. And I said, look, I'll set up a local group where I am. I said, but I can't do it at the moment. It's going to be in a few months' time. Absolutely fine, he said. And I was true to my word. And then basically I just started doing some local stuff. I then started being put on a retainer from the Taxpayers Alliance. I took on the national job of running the grassroots on a part-time basis. That went to a full-time basis. But to bring the story back to the beginning, I'm not quite sure if it hadn't have been for that sort of chance drive down the M1 to visit friends in Sheffield, I'm not quite sure I would still be doing this.
Oh, excellent. Oh, that's good. Yeah, it's funny how life turns out, as they say.
It really is. It's all a series of certain chance events that sort of get you where you are. You know, I mean, after the Taxpayers Alliance, Dia Chakravarti now works for the Telegraph. She was moved from the Freedom Association to the Taxpayers Alliance. I was thinking about a move. I wasn't happy there, but I just felt, I needed a bit of a move. Just be a little bit fresher. And I spoke to Simon Richards, who was chief executive of the Freedom Association. And he said, maybe there might be an opportunity with us. And I said, why do you think I'm calling you, Simon? He went, I was very slow on that, wasn't I? But I got took on as campaign manager, became head of campaigns, and now I'm chief executive. So, it's all about, certain things happening by chance. Serendipity, one of my favorite words in the English language.
Excellent, yes. So Dan and I were at the Julian Becker lecture, where, of course, we spoke with yourself and others, where Nigel Farage spoke. How did that come about, and what other events do the Freedom Association have on?
Well, Gillian's one of our council members, and I mean, she basically funds these lectures. It's her sponsorship. She was the founder, and she used to run the Institute for the Study of Terrorism, during the Cold War days, and she's an international best-selling author. So she asked a few years ago whether she could basically sponsor these events in her name, and we've done a few of these lectures. It is supposed to be an annual lecture, although last year, for all sorts of various reasons to do with restrictions, we didn't have one. But as for Nigel, well, we simply asked him. Our chairman, David Campbell Bannerman, despite leaving UKIP and going back to the Conservatives in his time as an MEP, was Nigel's deputy leader of UKIP at one point, and they're still on good speaking terms. So David asked him, and Nigel said yes, and he was in very good form, I think. I mean, it is available on YouTube. If you go to the Freedom Association's YouTube channel, you will be able to watch that.
No, indeed, very good form, an excellent evening, excellent speech. And then more broadly, of course, what are the main campaigns the TFA is involved in, and how can people get involved?
Well, free speech is the one at the moment. All this cancel culture. I thought a few years ago this just would be a fad that would just go away, and I was wrong on that, wasn't I? It seems to be around us all the time. People feel less free to speak their minds now than they did just 5 years ago, according to an opinion poll last year. So we do have to protect free speech. It is one of the fundamental pillars of a free society. So that is certainly very important. We intend to do much more work in universities. Indeed, at the end of the month, I'm down in Exeter. I'll be at a meeting of our Student Freedom Society there in Exeter, as well as meeting other members of the Freedom Association. So we certainly want to up our work there. I mean, in the past, just briefly, our main campaign has been Better Off Out. We were one of the very first groups that advocated leaving the European Union. We were told we were mad. We were told we were stupid to waste any resources doing that. There'll never be a referendum. And even if there is, the majority will never vote to leave. Well, we all know how that ended. So that's taken up a lot of bandwidth of the association over the years, but that is gradually sort of being wound down now. We will still work with other groups to help promote all the Brexit success stories as they come in. But no, certainly moving much more onto freedom of speech, opposing cancel culture, and promoting those sort of things in universities. To become a member of the Freedom Association, very simple. Go onto our website, tfa.net. That's the Freedom Association, tfa.net. And in the top corner, you'll find a join button. Just a few simple instructions, and you can become a member.
Fantastic. And yes, having got free entry to the lecture with Nigel and getting the great magazines through from yourselves, it's definitely worthwhile. I can attest to it.
Well, this is it. I mean, the thing is, there will be certain member-only events, Mike. I mean, on a popular event such as that lecture, it was always going to be oversubscribed with members. So therefore, really, people from the outside of the association sadly couldn't really get in, other than certain invited guests, such as journalists and parliamentarians. So basically, it was a members-only event. So you become a member, you get the first bite of the cherry of being able to attend events like that.
No, absolutely. No, fantastic. Thank you. And encourage our listeners to get involved with the Freedom Association.
Absolutely. I myself have been a member, I think, now for over 20 years. So it's been a great organisation. Obviously, did a
You're not that old, are you, Dan? I can't believe it.
I am. I think I joined when I was a student.
The question is, what did you do before retirement?
Deary me. But yeah, the Freedom Association's done a lot of great work over the years. Obviously, most recently, or most famously, with, as you said, Andrew, the Better Off Out campaign, which really was great because it brought a lot of people together who otherwise maybe wouldn't have worked together, such as people who were in UKIP and people who were in the Conservative Party, and who, because they would be campaigning against each other in various elections, there's almost a sense of perhaps being the enemy, potentially, but the Freedom Association, particularly through the Better Off Out campaign, really brought people together. And I think those things, you know, it did mean that some people decided to leave the Conservative Party and join UKIP, and possibly on some occasions go the other way. But it certainly helped.
You're absolutely correct there, Dan, because from 2014 to 2018, we did 5 freedom festivals, as we call them, basically a weekend of free speech debates. And we did them down in the coast in Bournemouth. And it was a really, really good way of bringing people back together again. I mean, many of the people who were in UKIP were former Conservatives, but the Conservatives and the UKIPers kept on talking to each other. Sometimes, you know, very, very convivially till 3 or 4 a.m. in the bar. But it helped keep people together, helped keep people talking and looking at what the greater prize was, and that was leaving the European Union and not to try and fight, you know, like rats in a sack. So those particular events were very useful.
Yeah, absolutely, and really helped when it came to the actual referendum and people actually working together, even though, as we know, there were some issues between the official Leave campaign and the not so official Leave campaign, but actually on the ground, most people were working together very, very well. And I think that, you know, the sort of relationships and ideas that have been engendered by the Freedom Association and the Better Off Out campaign really, really helped to build those relationships and to get the win on the day.
Very much so.
So thanks for that, Andrew. Mike, what have we got on our website, and what have we been up to?
Yes, indeed. So firstly, some articles from our website. We've mentioned it already. The misplaced £73 million from Croydon Council. We've got an article on that, just gives a bit more detail, points back to some of the original information from the Local Government Chronicle on that. Worth having a look if you want more information. It was released in October, but we finally got round to looking at Grant Thornton, the council's auditor's second report in the public interest. This one on the Fairfield Halls. As many of you all know, the Fairfield Halls are massively overspent on its redevelopment. Anyone that's visited the Fairfield Halls might struggle to see where that money went. But the report in the public interest is incredibly damning. It's a long report. We've got a summary of some of the key points. So I'll just read a couple of quotes from it. In obtaining external legal advice and not fully considering or implementing that advice, it's our view that the council failed to ensure it was acting lawfully. That's the quote from auditors. That's not the sort of language auditors normally use. Another quick quote is, in June 2016, Cabinet decision referred to a £30 million investment in the project. We have found that the final expenditure of the project was 67.5 million. And the point being, no one ever approved that they could find. So well worth reading, incredibly damning, just gives you a bit of an idea of what's been going on in our borough. On the good news front, we have found something good about Croydon Council. Unfortunately for taxpayers, it's that they're really good at having high council tax. In London, Croydon is has had the third highest increases in council tax in the last decade. And we're the 5th highest overall council tax out of 32 boroughs. So we've got a bit of an article on that, gives you an idea of how Croydon sizes up to other boroughs. So not just hopeless, expensive as well. But yeah, you can read more on our site. In terms of what we've been up to, we had a hustings for our local elections. Thanks to David from the Christian People's Alliance, Zach from the Heritage Party, Gavin, the independent mayoral candidate, Lawrence from the Libertarian Party, and Steve from the SDP. And indeed, our last podcast was their speeches from the night. For their speeches, for their Q&A session, really enjoyable night. Really good to meet some people who are in and around some alternative parties in politics, some, you know, liberty-loving parties and views, and want to get some management back into the borough. They're not all locals, they won't all run, but certainly some of them you'll see on ballot papers this May. We've got some photos from the night up there, and we've also got an interview with Gavin Palmer, who's running as an independent candidate for mayor. Quick quote from him, from his article: happier, peaceful, wealthier and healthier, talking about how he wants Croydon to be, efficiently well run in every department, boringly so, a large number of talented civic duty minded elected councillors. So that's his vision. You can read more about that, and yeah, something to think about for May. And then lastly, an event coming up. As usual, our third Wednesday drinks, libertariandrinks.com, if you want to have a look at the website of where they are up and down the country. Yeah, third Wednesday drinks, Wednesday the 16th of March, from 7 p.m. in the George in Croydon.
Excellent. Yes, the hustings were a really good evening. Some excellent speeches and some really engaging Q&A sessions. So yes, thank you to everybody who attended, and obviously in particular to the speakers. And Mike, as you say, we've now published the speeches from that, so they're available on our YouTube channel and on the podcast feed. So do please listen into those. It's about 20 minutes worth, so well worth it. Well, if you'd like to write for our website or have any stories you'd like us to cover, please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter at Croydon Const, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalist.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube channel. Do please like, share, and leave a review. It helps others to find the podcast, and it's always good to get some feedback. Well, thank you ever so much to Andrew for joining us on the podcast today. It's been really good to speak with you, and hopefully over the summer months, and hopefully if World War III doesn't happen and we're fully free again, hopefully we can get together and perhaps do some campaigning.
Yeah, that'd be very, very good. It'd be nice to speak to you all as well. Just listening to Mike there talking about a hustings event, isn't it wonderful just to be back in the same room again, to be able to meet new people? There's only so much you can do via Zoom. You don't have drinks with them afterwards. You don't have a chat. You don't meet new people, do you? It's just wonderful to be back meeting people again.
It does make you appreciate in real life. It really does.
And thank you to everybody for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay free, everybody.